I am the author of these two books and a keynote speaker and a coach for business and life.
We're at noon. So thanks everybody for, hi. I'm glad that you're a student. Um, so thanks for tuning in, and we'll see how many people happen to join us. But I find that these live streams are fun because once you're done, you get video, and I'll try to share the full length video, but I think there's some limitations on Instagram. And Sharon and I haven't actually, one thing we didn't talk about is how long we're going to go for. I think we could probably gas on forever, but I'm thinking shorter is sweeter. So it's not going to be 5 minutes, but it's also not going to be hours. and
Well,
but
and most
anyway,
of us have to work, so that's good.
yeah, that's good. And we try to time this for, well, at least people on the East Coast lunch break. Um, but I'm really so happy to have Sharon with me. She, when we met, I guess a few years ago, we were both at an event where we were doing public speaking, and the topic was heritage.
Mm.
And my preface to my heritage was that I said that Koreans were the Irish of the East, and then Sharon was like, "Oh my gosh, so you're my brother from another mother," because of course Sharon is Irish. But we got to know each other then, and then we found out we had in common the same coach who was helping us with public speaking, and then we've kept in touch ever since. But I'll let Sharon, introduce herself a little bit as to who she is. She told me that she could spot me as a doctor from a mile away. So
It's
maybe you
true.
can explain why you know so much about doctors.
Well, so first of all, thank you for having me, and whoever does join or joins in the future, I'm so glad that you took the opportunity to have a real conversation with two people that have been in the medical industry for quite a long time. So I met Chris in Long Island, which is where I'm from originally, but I'm here in Tampa Bay, and I've been here for 20 years now. And as mentioned, Frank King was the one who kind of connected us to go to the Speak event. And I saw Chris from a mile away and even said to Alyssa, I said, "Oh, that's a doctor." And the reason I knew that is because he was on the phone, very serious, trying to wrap it up. And I know that look very well because I started my career in my 20s as the director of operations for New York Medical. So, having 11 offices and 42 satellite offices of neurologists, orthopedics, internal medicine, and then acupuncture, massage therapy, physical therapy, also known as the happier side. It was a great introduction to the medical industry. So I've just been working with doctors for so long, and then I ran pediatrics for 8 years, and I've been on my own for the last 11, kind of consulting and coaching and writing books about mental health in the workplace. Ooh.
Yeah. Well, it was kind of amazing because when I met Sharon, she's had quite a life journey. And the kind of amazing thing was that was kind of on top of us doing this public speaking and stuff at this event. It was a homecoming for Sharon because she hadn't really been spending time near her home, where she grew up until that event, and she was really sharing and bearing, really like the an amazing story about her origins and what she went through in her younger years. And at that point, you had already written your first book. Am I
Yeah.
remembering the
Mhm.
chronology right? Which was
Yeah.
the broken road to mental health.
You got
And
it. This one.
yeah, and a lot of what she talked about in her talk was about how she got there. But maybe we can start off with some of the missteps that happened when you were young, and where you found yourself and where you pulled
Well,
yourself out from.
and well, just to tie into the topic of mine, it was where I'm from. That was the name of the talk, which ended up being a chapter in my second book, Where I'm From. because my parents are immigrants from Ireland, from Dublin. And even though I grew up in Long Island, New York, I've always said it was actually in Ireland because, anybody that grows up in a state or a certain country, they bring all of their traditions. So although I was in Long Island, New York, I had to walk to school, um, which wasn't a bad thing. It was a really good thing. But a lot of just things that weren't very American were happening, and that's one of the reasons that Chris and I really connected. Because when your parents and your family are not from the place that you're living in, whether that be where Chris is from, a little different hurdles for you than I did, because although being Irish, I was speaking the language. I blended in with everybody, that's for sure. But I didn't feel good about myself as a teenager. I had a really hard time. My parents, thankfully, were very strict. They sent me to private school, and as I like to say, I was from a residential area, which in rehabs really meant nothing to the counselors. That I was trying to convince them that I wasn't like everybody that I was in these rehabs with, because where I'm from, it's normal to drink, and for it to be very social, to have a lot of alcohol around, and I think everybody knows that. Just look at what happens on St. Patrick's Day in New York City or New Year's Eve, right? So I think that there's something to be said about just really, I felt more comfortable with alcohol in my hand, and then it moved on to other things. My parents certainly did not have an issue with alcohol. That was not, it was just in the generations, I think there's a lot of, um, shame and silence surrounding the difficult things, like talking about mental health in life and in business. And you and I not only connected because of that talk, but because I had interviewed you on my podcast years ago after we talked about depression, and you've been very open with that. And what I love so much about your story, in that it just goes to show that everybody heals in a different way. My path wasn't the same as your path, but we're still connected through that because we both understand what depression is like, what it's like trying to get the right help, what is going to be the thing that gets us well. So,
Well,
yeah,
one
our
of the things
heritage
about
has a
your
lot to do
story,
with
if
it.
yeah, if you don't mind my bringing it up, but
Please.
one of the things about your story was how you were going through these various things and having these problems, and that your father's EAP was the one who kind of was the first dramatic, in a way, if that's
Yeah.
correct, the
hmm
intervention. And tell us a little bit about that, like where you were at that point, and then what
hmm
happened.
So the reason I wrote two books was because it's a lot, right? My memoir is the first book, The Broken Road to Mental Health. I mentioned Tuesdays with Ben, which Ben was the EAP. For those of you who don't know, an EAP is an employee assistance program. And because my father was the boss of a division of New York Hospital, his daughter, the one that went to these rehabs that told people that I'm from a residential area, at the ripe age of 19 years old, blacked out and moved to Detroit, Michigan from New York in a blackout. So anybody who's from Detroit, Michigan, no shame, but I don't know what the hell I was thinking picking that cold place, because I thought it was cold in New York, but that's the coldest place I've ever been. And and I ended up staying there from 19 to 21 years old. So if you can imagine, it's very full circle. So I will say that for my father to be a boss, showing up to work every day with a team of employees, and knowing his daughter was in a blackout, alcohol, drug induced, just comatose to the world from the age of 19 to 21 after two rehabs, a halfway house, in and out of therapy. And then when I came back home, thankfully at 21 years old, and I say thankfully because the fact that I made it home is a miracle. It was I went from this girl from a residential area to being in a blackout in Detroit, Michigan, being homeless and addicted, bartending at random places. But I went to see, my father said, why don't you consider coming to see Ben, my EAP. I think you'd really like him. My father and I are a lot alike, and he was the boss for many years. I ended up being the boss for many years myself in the medical industry. And I went to see Ben, and every Tuesday I would go see Ben. And Ben was the first counselor therapist to be brave enough to ask me the most important question that any professional has ever asked me, which was, are you having suicidal thoughts? So at 21 years old, and if you're from New York, in a depression, coming from Long Island, taking the Long Island Railroad, a bus, a subway, walking to 72nd and York, to see somebody in this depression and having him ask me the absolute question that was to free me from the isolation that I felt. And I said yes. And then from there was able to get the real help that I needed, which was at the root of my alcoholism and addiction. How's
Yeah.
that for an
So
answer?
yeah, just I thought I'd take a step back because one person asked, "What are we talking about?" So just to frame things up, because we kind of just went right into it. I mean, we did talk a little bit about, but Sharon and I both have our experiences in challenges in mental health. I went through a period of depression for about 2.5 years. Sharon had a little bit more extended thing with, as she described, a period of addiction and then dealing with her mental health issues. And she's written two books. One was called The Broken Road to Mental Health, and which it's a memoir and also kind of observational things, recommendations of how to deal with certain kinds of challenges in mental health, but a lot of it based on her personal experience of having been involved with addiction to terrible drugs and being completely out of control to regaining control of her life. And then more recently, she wrote a second book, the the broken open road to mental health. And maybe you can frame that up a little bit before we get into. I would like to talk a little bit more about suicidal ideation and depression, but maybe just frame up what the second book is about so people have an idea
Mhm.
of what you did.
Sure. So, and both of these, I talk about business too, because as we had mentioned before, I mean, Chris is the clinical side, not so much in the work that he's doing currently, but, I worked with doctors for my whole career, from my 20s up until I'm 53 now, and I got sober at 21 years old. So I've been around for a minute in this world of recovery. Um, so when I wrote my memoir in 2019, I was consulting for physicians. I was restructuring medical practices from New York to Chicago to Tampa Bay. And the common theme that I saw in the workplace was just very toxic behaviors. Okay. And I just posted recently about a study that 80% of people it was a study that they did, I think it was on monster.com, that 80% of people today feel like they work in a toxic workplace. So, but to get back to how I ended up writing the second book, be afraid of the next time I write a book, because the first time I wrote my memoir in 2019, then we all know what happened in 2020, that wonderful panorama that still gives me a trauma response. And then right before I released this book in 2024, right after it, there were two major hurricanes that devastated the place that I'm from here in Tampa Bay. So what I realized, even though I was sober 25 years when I wrote my first book, I had no idea, and I mean I had no idea, that I had so much suppressed trauma from that time of when I blacked out at the age of 19 to Detroit, Michigan. Because what I know is very common, this is not something I'm guessing. I've been speaking all over the country about mental health and life and in business for a few years now, is that once I started writing my memoir, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I went through all that. I haven't thought about that in years. Oh my God, I was homeless. Oh my God, I was addicted. How did I survive? How did I, and then I start reading and I start educating myself about my own depression, which I find it has been way more difficult to manage than getting sober. I mean, I haven't had a drink or a drug for 31 years. I still have to work really, really hard to be mentally well. I have a whole workout regimen that I do on the daily, which includes, exercise, nutrition, and meditation, which we can get to later. But I think that there's always going to be a root of everybody's issue. And once I started doing this healing from the trauma that I endured, it just opened up a whole new world for me. I had no idea that my nervous system was just so crazed. I would react. I was constantly, I would yell, I would rage even at my husband. And I was sober 25 years and I've done a lot of work on myself. But there was so much suppressed trauma because I was really taught, at no fault of my parents, this is generational, is that, well, she's home now from Detroit, Michigan. Now she's sober and she's getting help for her depression. Whatever you do, don't bring up Detroit, Michigan. Like nobody talk about it, right? Because if we don't talk about it, then it's like it didn't happen. And I did what everybody wanted me to do. The messaging I got was, don't talk about what you've been through and just keep going.
Yeah.
And that suppression that's 25 years of just pushing all of that down because it wasn't safe for me to share
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's kind of that one of the things that I noted in terms of my experience. My initial thing that triggered my depression was a work-related stress. And it was a stressful environment, like you're describing, toxic environments. And in the time, at my level of position in my company, there were about 20 of us, and two other people literally, I never missed it. I was kind of, I jokingly call myself like the functional alcoholic, the functional depressive. I never missed a day
Mm,
of work. I managed to hit my deadlines despite the depression. But I had two colleagues who literally had to take large breaks, months of
mm,
time off from work because they had gotten to a point where the pressure had built up so much and they had gotten so traumatized that they
mm,
literally could not show up to work for a significant period of time. And the other thing that I found really weird about that was that there's no, you don't talk about it, exactly the same way you're talking about. When the person comes back, God forbid that you actually address why they were out. There's all sorts
mm.
of euphemisms, and no one ever talks about mental illness. We're a lot farther along than we were, let's say,
Oh
50
yeah.
years ago or 20 years ago, and we know that lots of people have depression, that they are on antidepressants and things like that, but it's still a taboo subject. You can't really talk about it. And so like you're saying, it can be like this suppressed trauma that in theory, you're back at work, let's say, and you've gotten past a certain acute challenge, but you still don't talk about it because no one would ever bring it up because it's dangerous. It's
Yeah.
not something you can talk about. I'm hoping that by having more conversations about it and being real about it, that it becomes more normal, that people can have conversations about it. But because to your point, when you just kind of say, okay, thank God it's over, and you just pretend it never happened, that's
Mm.
actually just suppresses things and lets things fester as well.
Well, I honestly didn't know, Chris, that the trauma was living inside of my body. So when I was reading books by Dr. Gabor Mate and Peter Levine, and I was learning so much about how everything that had happened to me as a young adult was still living inside of me. And once I started doing the work to release it, to talk about it, I mean, it had been 25 years. Um, so I really had to go through a full healing. And this is during the pandemic, and this is after I wrote this book. So not only am I still working with physicians, but I'm healing myself. I haven't thought of these things, and thank goodness, I had a really great therapist, and I've since moved on to somatic therapy because I've learned now ways of responding versus reacting, which is what I used to do, even as a boss, even as an employer. you should take things personally. This will resonate with your audience, I'm sure. You know, imagine what it would have been like, Chris, if you had been depressed, you come back to work, nobody's mentioning anything, but imagine what it would have been like if somebody just said, "How are you?"
I love that you bring that up because one of the things that it's one thing for the person who, explicitly, oh, Sharon had to take time off.
Mhm.
There was some, in some kind of, yeah, she needed a break, a mental break or
Something going
whatever.
on with her. Yeah.
Yeah. But the thing that also bothers me a lot, and it goes back to the suicidal ideation stuff, is, so many times we see people under tremendous strain at work and we know that they're suffering. And it could, like any given person, just one day, it could just be something didn't go their way, like they got a flat tire to work. It's not actually a traumatic thing,
Hmm.
but it throws off their day. But it also is the kind of thing where, just asking in a very open-ended way, how are things going, and being willing to receive the information and support the other person can make all the difference, because the thing about suicidal ideation is that um, it's, we don't understand suicide because, we kind of examine it after the fact and things like that. Classically, there are people who do things like write long notes and things like that, but there are plenty of people who just are feeling terrible about themselves and who opportunistically, spontaneously make a foolish decision and just do something that results in their death. And it could all it could have been to intervene in someone's actions in that regard would be just someone asking after them and asking how are things really going and expressing an interest in how they're doing, and I think it's an incredible tragedy because we have, the prevalence of depression is, at any given time, some measures say about 10% of the population has depression, major depression. And so that's, just think most of us work in places that there are more than 10 people. So there's a decent chance that someone around you is suffering from something. And just by caring for someone else enough to ask how things are going, especially when it can be obvious that things aren't going well, could make all the difference in someone's life.
And it really isn't as complicated, I think, as people tend to make it. You know, I was just asked, I was on the news last week, and it's wonderful for me because I'll have this content for life. But I always know that majority of companies don't understand what mental health benefits that they have, right? So if you have an EAP, it's like one of the best kept secrets. So EAP again is an employee assistance program for people that don't know. And for small businesses or people that can't afford to have insurance, we all know how expensive it is today. Just asking somebody how they are, but then not talking. So there's a real, I think that one of these things I hope to give as a takeaway to your audience, Chris, is listening is not waiting for our opportunity to talk. Anybody that knows me has heard me say this, I don't know, 900 times. It's very difficult for somebody to say, "How are you?" and then be quiet. So most people want to do a few things. They either want to fix it, they want to offer you a solution, or they want to compare it to what happened to their Uncle Leo in North Carolina. So, for example, I would say, I'm just really sad today. Oh, what's going on? Well, I mean, I was kind of sad about what happened in Jamaica. Well, we should be grateful that we are, at least we have our health. Okay. Well, so it's not okay for me to talk about my sadness. Okay. That's very clear here in that scenario.
Yeah.
There's never a space. And so what I always ask people to do is just to try to offer a little pause in between the ask, how are you? And then be quiet. Because if you have the power within yourself to be quiet, which is the key, especially, us from New Yorkers, right? We know how hard that is. To then wait for somebody to talk because they will tell you if they believe you care enough to listen. And then at the end of whatever it is that they say, there are two really great questions that you could ask somebody. Number one, do you want feedback? And then they have the opportunity to say yes or no. No, I just needed you to listen. Or my favorite, what can I do to support you? And then be quiet again. We don't need to recommend a therapist, a doctor, what medication works for you. And we certainly don't need to talk about Uncle Leo from Ohio or what you went through as a kid and you have no idea how good you have it. Oh, I left the country and moved here. You just left the state to another state. Nobody needs to hear any of that. That's comparative. My girlfriend Natasha and I always say trauma Olympics. I'm not here to play trauma Olympics with you. You've now just showed me that it's not safe for me to share about myself. That's important in life and in business. And if leaders don't know how to just ask somebody how they're doing,
I
that's
would
not
say
some.
leaders are the more,
They're the
just the word
worst.
leader makes it, they're most susceptible to not being able to do this. It's really
Somebody, they
hard.
asked me though, they said, is that a HIPAA? You can imagine how I felt with this one, Chris. Is it a HIPAA violation to ask that? What does that even mean?
Yeah,
No, HIPAA is not asking somebody how they are. That's actually
yeah,
just being a good human being.
yeah, yeah. I think, well, it's also interesting how we kind of schematize it in the workplace. I feel like we're not really, um, I think anyone who has any responsibility as a manager or in any kind of leadership position should have mandatory training about how to simply ask about these things. One of my colleagues, who went out at that period of time that I was describing when I was working at Merck, had a supervisor, and he had this chip on his shoulder because he didn't have the typical background to have the responsibility they had, which was a great opportunity. But
Mhm.
of course, that also made him like have to, prove himself superhumanly. So he took
Yes.
on way more work than anybody. He was assigned more work, and he just kept taking it on.
Mhm.
And others of us who were his peers were looking at him like, how can you possibly be doing this? You
Mhm.
can't be leading three teams that are actively going to, for us, first in human studies. You can't manage that many teams doing that. Like one of these teams is like a more than full-time commitment, and you're taking on three of them. How can you be doing this? And he'd just be like, I know, I know. And you could just see the franticness of his, he couldn't even think straight because he's having to juggle these three things. And he would go to his manager and tell her how he was not so sure he could do it. And,
Mhm.
with all good intent, her response to that was like, I know you can do it. So
Yeah.
what happened was he got to a point where he literally was at work and I mean, like we talk about breakdowns. But this was the one case I know of where it literally was a breakdown, meaning he got into his office, he had built
He had a
himself up
panic
to this.
attack.
He more than a panic attack, it was a
Mhm.
panic, like because a
Mhm.
panic attack to me clinically is very short lived. He was devastated. He could not move. He could not. He had to call his wife to come pick him up and
Mhm.
pull him out. He couldn't drive home,
Mhm.
and he had been driven to that state with all good intent. You can do it. You can. I believe in you,
Yeah.
kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And I don't think it was meant to be toxic, but it was this cluelessness of the manager not knowing how to ask. Wait, you're telling me you're in distress. Tell me more. Like, what's going on? Is this too
Mhm.
much? What can I do to help you?
Yeah.
That
What
was
can
what.
I do to support you?
Yeah. And
Such
if
a
part of
simple
that support is,
question.
you know what, I need to get rid of one of these effing projects,
Yes.
that's what you need to do as a manager, because that's sometimes what you need to do, not get more work out of someone.
Yeah, I don't buy into this whole like burnout is definitely a thing, but it really just means poor leadership. There would be no burnout if um, leaders and organizations understood how to encourage programs like an employee assistance program or could encourage just more than just a happy hour. The whole like team building, and now we're coming into the holidays, and everybody want to go axe throwing with a martini. We want to sip and shop. We want to do a wine walk. We want to do a boozy brunch. This is, to me, right, as somebody who's been sober, is we want to talk about like inclusivity. There's been nothing inclusive about the workplace for me for decades. And now I
Right.
think that, right, for decades. Now, at
Right. As
least
you're
there's
as
a,
you're like, hello, I have substance abuse. I'm
yeah,
literally in AA. Thank you for the boozy brunch. Yeah.
yeah, I've literally, oh, you want me to come to your wine walk? Well, hold on. Let me get ready. So it's really, so what is so interesting just about that, Chris, because I know that how this would resonate with you. I don't have, my husband drinks, I don't have anything against, I'm
Right. You
raised
don't
in the
have
United
a
States.
problem
I
with
don't
people
care. No,
imbibing and
no.
all that. Right.
No, have a great time. I say go for it. You probably won't black out and move to Detroit, Michigan like me. I'm the one with the problem. So, but I think that if we realized how it's like everything is okay about everybody getting drunk at your Christmas party that's coming up, because the open bars are outrageous. There's galas that are happening here all over the place, open bars, and we wonder why there's so many DUIs, and it's constant. So the real conversations like we're having right now are not happening enough. So when somebody brings me into a corporation, they say, "Well, Sharon, we can't afford EAP, or we have an EAP, but nobody uses it." Well, I'm going to tell you exactly why nobody's using it. Because you're only talking about it once a month, one time a year, sorry. In November, here comes the time where we get the new insurance plan, right? So they're brokering these deals with insurance companies. If UHC costs too much, we're going to move it to Blue Cross Blue Shield. And we're going to talk about all the physical benefits that you have. We're going to talk about the doctor, the network that you can get into, how much your deductible is, and what your copay is. And you have this EAP program. Well, 90% of people don't know what an EAP even is. And really, even being interviewed just recently, and I knew that NBC had an EAP program before I got there, but the person interviewing me, I felt so bad because she didn't even know. How do you not know that your company has this? But because we, just like everybody wanted me to not talk about being in Detroit, Michigan in a blackout and being suicidal and literally trying to leave the earth, we don't want to talk about that. That doesn't, if we talk about it, doesn't mean that I want to do it again. Just
Right.
because, suicide is, this is a word, even when somebody dies by suicide or an overdose, you see the post, this person is dead now. Okay, well, now I'm left to think, well, it must have been suicide, or it must have been an overdose, because you didn't say, I can't believe they lost their battle with cancer. I can't believe that they had a heart attack. I can't believe that they had a stroke. It's just this, they're dead. Now, a person like me knows what happens. I know what happened. And the shame that is surrounding these conversations is, and the silence is really what is killing us. So I don't buy into stigma. I don't like that word. Just like you said, the only way to normalize this conversation is to actually have this conversation. To me, this is like breathing in and out. I like nothing more than talking about mental health. And I am a fun person. And Chris is actually a comedian. Like, we like to have a good time. When I was in Kew Gardens with him, he took me and we had corn dogs, very special corn dogs too, didn't we? Korean, not Vietnamese corn dogs,
Yes,
but
yes,
really
we
lovely.
did.
And we can talk about depression, alcoholism, addiction, suicide, and we can have Korean corn dogs and have a blast, right?
Yeah.
And then
So,
and make a difference in people's lives.
well, the thing is that I think, like, I'm just responding to this. I don't know why someone's asking about whether we're comfortable in Hindi. Um, really,
Comfortable with it all.
really have no idea what. Yeah, I know the language, that there is a language Hindi, but that's about it. Um, we certainly can't switch. Oh, we can't switch into Hindi for sure.
Well, we could try. Might be bad for me.
But anyway, yeah, I think that it's kind of funny. I can't remember what movie it was that I saw like when I was a kid in the 70s, and there's like one cancer being the code word that you can't say out loud. And there's like
C
some
word.
meal where the mom is embarrassing everyone because she keeps like saying something and then saying the word cancer, like cancer, like a really loud whisper.
Right.
Depression, suicide. These are it's not something obviously that you bring up as a
Topic
little
at dinner conversation.
icebreaker when you have strangers meet. But
Hmm.
at the same time, I think you know that, like I said, I think when it's relevant, we don't ask after people.
Hmm.
We don't ask. For example, someone's been out and it was because as you know, even though it's a private thing that you're out for mental illness and things like that. Everyone knows that it wasn't, everyone knows it wasn't like a heart attack. Someone took
Hmm.
time off work, and yet, people don't really, in a way, ask after that, like how things
Hmm.
are going. Like all these things that you would, for example, for a heart attack, you would ask about. We don't have the language because we never talk about it. And so, I would say, one of the things that would be one of the ways that you get comfortable with anything that's uncomfortable is to start talking about it, and you start learning the language, you start learning how to be empathetic to people who have these challenges by having conversations with them, and I don't think you have to run around and find people, but you're going, all of us are surrounded by it all the time. And so just being open, like you said, I had this whole series about, male loneliness, and
Hmm.
I've been giving advice about male friendship. And one of the biggest things is about, listening, because so many times when people are having conversations, like you were saying, they're anxious trying to figure out, like you were saying, stopping the conversation on the other side is, oh, it's my turn to tell them something, as
Yes.
opposed to, this is my opportunity to listen and reflect.
Hmm.
And I think it's particularly helpful in these kinds of conversations, but they're helpful just in general, to really listen to other people and to not be so active on your own side. Because the only way to be really, I think, tuned into someone else is to not have an agenda that you're trying to get across, to just, like you said, can you empty your mind? Can you sit back and actually really listen to what the other person said? And
Mm.
I think it takes practice, and it's
Oh,
something that
yeah.
all of us can get good at.
And be curious, I mean, they even say in business, if you're going to a networking event and you feel uncomfortable, people love nothing more than to talk about themselves. Just try it. Just say, how are you? And see what happens. See how long you're stuck in that awful conversation. And there's a lot of interrupting happening all the time. There's a reason why people trust me to tell me their deepest, darkest. Number one, I've written 2 books about everything. I haven't hidden anything. It's all out there. So people know before they speak to me that they could tell me anything, and
Yeah, there's
believing me,
nothing
they
that's going to
do.
shock you.
Nothing, not one thing. And in the workplace and just in life. And it is so amazing how uncomfortable we can all be in a pause. But if we really just took the time to listen to somebody else, this is really how I feel like this is how we change the world. And I didn't start meditating for, many years. What's funny is that, so I'm sober 31 years, right? And in 12 steps in recovery, there's this one step that, everybody's made fun of on SNL, and I'm totally fine with that. We haven't burned any chickens yet in any of these programs, but they are free and they are a great resource and they could actually save your entire life. But it says sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God. I had somebody tell me the other day that they thought it was a religious program. And I said, oh my God, like an alcoholic and a drug addict like me would never survive a religious program. I promise you that's not good information. But there's one thing about being in a state of stillness that is a very easy thing to incorporate in our own lives and in business. If we could teach people how to be more mindful, how to have quiet spaces. Like me, I don't do well in big crowds. This is one of many reasons why I left New York. I'm much better and quiet, you
And
know.
of course,
Um,
I love just craziness, so that's why I'm here.
yeah, I mean, and I love going, you know, like we hit it hard when I showed up that day. I love the commotion, but I also need to go back to a place of quiet because I suffered terribly from depression. And when I know it's time to go, I have to go. And I have to have a place of stillness where I can reflect because just like you, I have a very busy life. I have a very busy job. I have like a husband and all the things, the dog, the kid in college. But I know that if I'm not strategic about my own mental wellness, I'm not good for anybody in my life and in my business. So I do this practice not just for me, but for every human being, every client that I encounter, and every time I speak on a stage or I'm working with leadership and corporate to teach people how to, you know, to just have. Listen, you want to solve turnover in your place of business. Have a conversation about mental health. And you know too, Chris, I mean, the younger generation, thank God. Thank God we have Instagram lives and we have TikTok and we have all these places to learn about, you know, generational trauma and how that stuff can really affect our lives, you know. And the world that we're living in today, we really have to be very cautious about who gets the opportunity to hear our story because not everybody deserves to hear it. That's why I like therapy.
Right, right. Well,
Chris, can you
yeah.
share what you did? Because I think that's very special. What helped you out of your
Oh,
depression?
well, that almost sounds like a comedy bit, I feel like in some ways. But yeah, so first of all, like I said, I felt like I was a functional depressive because
Mhm.
I never missed a day of work. You know, my job reviews in a very high pressure job were not negative. They weren't outstanding, but they weren't negative. You know, it was the kind of job where like being average was being above average or something like that, if you will.
Right. Hmm.
And so it was kind of odd, but I was so like first I try to explain that I really was depressed, you know, because given that I was functional, you know, because usually if you look at the DSM, one of the first definitions of major depression is that you're not functional. You know, you can't
Mm.
hold a job or you can't do your work effectively. And I was not doing it as effectively as I should, but I was able to you know, kind of get by, if you will. But I was doing really horrible things to myself, like I would do kind of to try to avoid the pain. I would do crazy things like. I think I told you once, I did every crossword in the New York Times archive back to the very first, because it used to be,
Mm-hmm.
actually the app changed. It used to be that you could go, I don't remember the exact year, but it was like to 1945, you could do the original
Wow.
cross, and I just did every crossword, and I would just stay up all night. And I would do stupid things like watch a whole Netflix series starting at 11 p.m. and
Mm.
just, even though I didn't find them interesting, just kind of go through some crap Marvel series, you know, 13
Mm-hmm.
episodes until the next morning when I'd get in the car and drive out and I had this long commute to New Jersey. And so I was driving a lot because my commute to work was quite long. And in that period of time, because of that fatigue and things like that, I had, I think in the course of those 2.5 years, I think I had 6 single car accidents. I got dropped by
Mm.
every insurance program. I'm
Oh
not
my
a terrible
goodness.
driver, but you know, you can imagine if I've been up all night and haven't
Hmm.
slept. And these are tough roads. You know, the New Jersey Turnpike
Yeah.
is like a derby. So I really, and then I had suicidal ideation, and my suicidal ideation was just thinking about, again, I'm in a car where, you know, it's easy for me to get in an accident, just not on purpose, but what about slamming it into something and then boom,
Mm-hmm.
you know, all my problems are over.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and also, I should say that I was seeing a psychiatrist. I was taking antidepressants for a while. They may have helped to some extent. It's hard to measure on an individual basis, but eventually, I felt like I was definitely having side effects, and I wasn't so sure they were really doing that much for me. So during the 2.5 years of depression, for me at least, there was a significant period of that time where I weaned myself off the antidepressants because I felt I was getting side effects and not clear benefit. And it didn't seem to make much of a difference being off of them. So I just kind of stayed off of them and just felt like, I didn't have, I could go along without the side effects. And then for me, intellectually, I knew what I needed to do. I knew that for my personality type, I needed to get active in a project or something. And so I tried to do that through work. I would sign up for innovative things, and then I would not be able to pull through that because, of course, work was the whole site of the trauma
Right.
and source of trauma.
Hmm.
So anyway, so I'm bumbling along for a while, and then what ended up happening was specifically one week in June of 2018, my sister-in-law and I went to an open house. My wife and I had for a long time lived in a two-bedroom apartment in New York, which is nothing to complain about because plenty of people lived in smaller spaces with families. But we had two teenage girls um, in bunker. Uh, and
Bunk
bunk
beds.
beds and one bedroom. And we had always fantasized about getting a three-bedroom. And I came to realize that we were in a buyer's market and that I literally went through our bank accounts and realized we actually had more money saved up than I kind of realized, which is obviously kind of a nice thing to realize. And as buying a house is not as simple as buying a candy bar. Do you have a buck in your pocket? Because there's all these things you have to consider: how much of a mortgage you're willing to take on, how are you going to sell your present house, all these complicated financial transactions, and in general, you need professional help. So I started reaching out to my friends who had recently bought real estate, a real estate broker, a real estate lawyer, so on and so forth. And all of a sudden, that was the first time I had been reaching out to people in
Mm.
like a long
Yeah.
time. And I realized I was getting activated by this project. And
Mm.
I used that activation energy to then reach out to people who had nothing to do with buying a house, like friends I hadn't talked to in a while. And I was able to claw myself out of this depression so that by the end of that week, I was pretty much 90% back to my normal self, just like that. And my psychiatrist, when I told him about this, because I've been this kind of stuck in the rut, depressed person for 2.5 years, was kind of like he didn't want to say I don't believe you, but at the same time he was like, I'm sorry to put this in my record that this is the way you recovered. Do you mind if I talk to your wife and confirm, like from her impression, how did this all go? Because it was so unusual. But that's kind of how it happened for me, and it was that
Yeah.
getting involved in a complex project, needing people's
Hmm.
help, reaching out to people that helped pull me out of what I was in. And
Well, I think that
knock
it's
on
so,
wood, that that
yeah.
was it.
And they talk about that a lot in the book Lost Connections, it's a great resource for anybody that has struggled with depression. It talks about other ways that people have gotten through and over their depression. It's not always going to be a psychiatrist and a medication. And God knows that so many people are switching medications on the regular. And I have nothing against medication. If it wasn't for those 20 milligrams of Prozac in my first year of sobriety in my deepest, darkest depression, even if it was, in my opinion, what I think today is that it was placebo, because you give a little drug to a drug addict, she's going to be okay. But I do think that there's something really magical in what you are talking about, Chris, and that is, the opposite of addiction is community. And in Alcoholics Anonymous, even they talk a lot about isolation way before the pandemic. And when the pandemic happened, that's all we heard about. And that's why the former general surgeon had called this a loneliness epidemic. And he was right. And even for me, like being isolated, watching just television, exactly what you said, it was just a distraction. I never knew what I was watching when I was in my depression. I just needed some kind of noise.
Yeah,
And
just something that kind of occupy your brain
yes,
in a superficial
right.
way.
And if somebody asked me what I was doing, I'm like, well, obviously I'm binging on the show, but don't ask me what it's about because I have no idea. But, I think that it is really so important that people understand the power of connection And just what you did really, I mean, my goodness, the fact that it brought you out. And I talk a lot about opposite action. You know, on the daily, the first thing that when my eyes open, I am like, oh my goodness, I'm going to be social today because I like nothing more than being in my eating clothes and playing with my dog at home. But and in my profession and in my life, I know when I'm social, I know when I'm out with people, I feel better. And it's not always easy to practice that opposite action of like, if your brain is telling you you should stay home and binge another episode or just go to a movie, because I've been guilty of that too, anything to distract this brain. What we really should focus on doing is try to develop some relationships, do our best to go out. And then, you know, if you have to go home and isolate for 7 hours, at least you got 1 hour of connection with other people. So Chris, is there anybody that's in the chat that has a question, or can we help somebody today while we're doing this?
Yeah, I haven't seen there's one person who wanted to jump in, but I don't feel comfortable with that, so I'm not gonna do that. But I haven't seen any questions so far.
Does anybody have any questions or want to make a comment? We can invite you into this conversation, maybe not into the video.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe not. But
It's okay.
yeah, so I'm just trying to think if there's any specific things I wanted to ask you about. Um, oh, yeah, this is Mary. Hi. Oh, thanks. Thanks for the feedback. But yeah,
What's the
we'll,
feedback,
we'll.
Chris?
Oh, sorry, not a question, and I'm late because I guess you can't see the same thing I'm saying.
Yeah.
Not a question, and I'm late to the call, but the little I heard rings so true for me.
Oh,
This is
good.
Mary
Well,
Chelsea,
that's
who's
why
a
we're
friend of mine.
here.
Yeah,
That's why we did this.
but
If we can help one person today, Chris, we have done our job.
yeah, but you know, I'll be putting out. I'll be saving this video for people to look at as they want to, and then I'll process little bits of this and try to edit it and try to make it interesting for parts of the things that we talked about. Um, oh, let me see.
You'd be surprised what
Oh
happens
boy,
when we
yeah.
pause.
So this is my friend Mary. She's saying having serious medical issues has made me have some depression, and yeah, I'm sympathetic to that. She's had some real serious challenges, and I haven't had a chance to talk to her lately. So I'll follow up with you. But I've been following from afar from Instagram, and need to catch up with you on what you've been doing. But yeah, it's tough sometimes to, you know, like sometimes you even have physical impediments to, you know, these meeting with people and things like that. Um,
And
but
grief
it's
is a
so
real
important.
thing. And, you know, everybody has a timeline on how long you should, you know, snap back out of it if you've been sick or if you've lost a dog or if you've lost a spouse or a family member, or if you lost your home in the hurricane. I mean, thank God you have your health. So there's a lot of space for all of us to just be a little bit more compassionate to each other and allow this conversation to happen and check in on each other and see how we're doing. It's because it's such a busy world that we're living in, and God knows that once these holidays, you know, I think we have until tomorrow, right? The 31st, and then I think it's Christmas tomorrow.
Yeah,
I'm not
then it's the
sure.
sprint, right? You have
Right. Yeah.
Halloween,
And then
Thanksgiving,
you get
Christmas.
exposed to the family you don't want to hang out with, and then you know you wonder why you still have to get on that flight, and there's a lot of people that are not able to say what they think and feel and do what they really
Well, we're
want.
always in environments where we're, you know, like because it, in some cases it's self-editing, right? Because you know that
Mm-hmm.
if you bring up your honest truth, you know that the family argument's going to go in the same spiral that it always does. So you kind of now you're kind of like forcing yourself not to share, you know, just
Yeah.
because it's disadvantageous. So
Well, I would encourage
um,
people that are in those situations to maybe reassess the people that are in their circle, and that includes family too. I just think that at
sometimes
this
that can
world,
be.
right, 2025, in the world, like, what are we all waiting for to not
Yeah.
live the best life for ourselves? So if that means it's a small world of just people that really bring joy to you. Like when I go to New York, I'm not looking too many people up. Chris, I am. A lot of my friends and a lot of I love my family. I'm very aware of where I feel comfortable being my whole self, which is a sober woman who would like to be offered more than a Diet Coke since she doesn't drink soda. So, I think that there's space and room for everybody, and offering somebody a pause to feel what they're feeling in front of us, and not putting yourselves in environments where you don't feel like you could be yourself. And here's a good warning sign. If you don't feel good about the company you're keeping, you know where you're going to feel it first? In your body. So pay attention to if your throat starts to close up or your chest, that there's a reason you're feeling anxiety, and maybe it's because of the people that you're exposing yourself to. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are great points, and I think I was just thinking back. One of the things you said earlier that resonates for me is how you have to take care of yourself because taking care of yourself makes you better for everyone else. Like
Everybody.
I really appreciate my mom. Recently, we went through a challenge because unfortunately my father's had depression for not depression. He's had dementia for a while. We finally had to put him in a dementia care facility. And I've known that my mom has not been taking care of herself because she's been focused on taking care of him. And just yesterday, it's only been a week and a half that he's been in the home. And she said, I'm realizing I feel empty. And I was like, oh, tell me what you mean by that. And what she was talking about was really anhedonia. She was saying, I have a really hard time getting out of bed these days. And because she's been negating herself, she's been 100% focused on just taking care of my dad to the point that her self-care has gone to zero. And I knew that. And I had been trying to push her to incorporate more care for my dad and taking it off her shoulders. But she's a Korean woman from the 1950s, really. She's stuck in the 1950s patriarchy. So there was nothing doing. But now that she's finally put him in a home, she's finally realizing all the things that she hasn't been attending to. So I'm hoping that with some help, with some therapy, with associating with her friends, that she could rebuild her life. But it's easy to slip into this for various reasons. In her case, it was the fact that she was 100% taking care of someone else, and that can lead to things like this too.
Well, can I step in and say something about that, Chris?
Yeah,
So my dad is in a memory care too, so I'm very familiar, and I'm so sorry about what you're going through.
yeah, I know you.
It's
I know you are very familiar with these things.
yes.
Yeah,
My last chapter is called "Dad, What Is This Here to Teach Me?" And I will say that what was very clear to me when I was the problem at 21 years old, when I was just getting off of alcohol and drugs, and I was in a depression, the focus was solely on me. Everybody was taking care of me. And as long as I was getting help, and as long as I was getting support and I was going to meetings, everybody else thought that that was all that had to be done. But the truth is that there needs to be an opportunity to, I think till 1:30, that there needs to be an opportunity for the whole family to get help, because this is never going to be just about me. If I have depression, if I have alcoholism, if I have addiction, everybody should be getting support. And at some point, just like what's going on with your mom, and I understand this, there needs to be support. There needs to be less isolation. There needs to be more care for yourselves. We have to start putting ourselves at the top of the list, because I am always the most concerned about the people that are taking care of everybody else. That screams, I don't take care of myself. There's a very good chance that I'll end up in a depression. And guess who that person is or was? That's old Sharon. I'm going to take care of everything else. I'm going to make sure. That's why I was a great boss. I'm going to put
right.
myself through all
You
of it.
you dealt with everyone else's problems, right?
That's right.
Yeah, I
And in
get
the
it.
medical community, this is a very, very difficult situation. There's many people that are not taking care of themselves. Hi, 1 o'clock. Okay. I have to wrap up now, Chris, because I
Well,
have another
we
meeting coming in here.
managed to keep our conversation going for an hour, but I did say that that I know we're capable of gassing on for unlimited time. But thank you so much for the hour, and
Thank
we'll be
you.
talking soon.
Thank you, Chris, so
I
much.
appreciate
And
you
thank you,
sharing.
everybody. Thank you.
Bye.